All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Ashley Boyd. I lead marketing and business development for Intermark Group. We appreciate you joining us during this crazy time. As marketers, it's no longer business as usual as a result of COVID-19. But instead of sitting back and losing steam, we're pacing full speed ahead, doing what we do best, psychology marketing, to help brands deliver positive, meaningful, and impactful marketing to their customers. Today on our webinar, we're going to discuss the use of psychology to inform consumer behavior and resulting marketing strategies during COVID-19, but also looking ahead to when we're virus-free. Our webinar speakers from Intermark are Jake McKenzie and Dr. David Bridwell. Jake McKenzie is the CEO of Intermark and is considered a national expert on psychology-driven marketing. He has a background in psychology and has helped shape successful brands like Toyota, Krispy Kreme, Progressive, and more. He's an avid reader and outdoors enthusiast, in addition to being a dad of 4. Dr. David Bridwell is a people scientist at Intermark by day and folk musician by night, who's interested in understanding how people are influenced and ultimately how they make decisions. At Intermark, he uses psychology to understand the mind of the consumer, shaping our creative so that it aligns with our customers' interests and their values. Before we kick things off, please make note of a few house rules. First, please mute yourself during our presentation. Second, and most important, please share your questions with us in the Zoom chat function. We'll answer questions in the final 15-minute Q&A at the end of the webinar. And last but not least, we'd love to hear from you after the webinar. So contact us with your questions, your thoughts, and if we can help your company with your COVID marketing strategy. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jake and David.
Thanks, Ashley. And I guess I'd start out by telling everybody happy April Fool's Day. I actually woke up this morning kind of hoping that all of this COVID stuff was a big joke and it would go away. But in fact, the kids are still here. They're not going to school. So joke's on me. But I'm excited to dive into this topic. I know everybody is off kilter, not just personally, but with your business. And trying to figure out what's going on, what ought we to be doing. And so we're in luck that there is over 120 years of academic research comparing similar times, the psychology of what's going on, and lessons that we can learn to apply both immediately and in the long term. And so we want to cover a lot of that today. So I will warn you, there's way more content that Dr. Bridwell wanted to cover than we can possibly get to today. So please ask questions in the Q&A function or send me an email afterwards, and we'll happy to dig in on your specific business or your industry, your customer segment, because chances are we've got a stack of stuff that's specific to it we just couldn't get to. Let's go ahead and dive in. So we'll start with a brief overview of Intermark. If you're on this, you're likely somewhat familiar with Intermark. We are a behavioral sciences ad agency. And by behavioral sciences, I mean psychology, sociology, behavioral economics. We've been lucky enough to work with some of the most successful companies in America, both big and small. And we cover everything under the marketing umbrella, as we like to say, from ads to apps, so from TV, your website, and mobile apps. But enough about us. I want to spend the bulk of today talking about the content at hand. And so we've got some large buckets we want to cover. We're going to have Dr. Bridwell review some basic psychology about what people are experiencing and how they process information very differently during this time. Then we're going to talk about immediate implications for your marketing, things we need to do right now based off of these things. We're going to talk about some behavior changes consumers are going through. And then we'll wrap up with some data about what happens as we come out of this period and longer term changes that are going to change how we move forward. If all you can do is listen to this point, I'll go ahead and give you the headline of the conclusion. The strategy that you walked into 2020 with is likely needing a major overhaul, if not a complete scrapping and change. The creative that we develop needs a fresh look. Some of the creative that you may be running is still appropriate. A lot of it's going to need a new approach because people are in just a very different frame of mind. We have different expectations. And you probably noticed that if anybody's been in a car or driven down the street, you see these outdoor boards from pre-pandemic, and they feel almost like an anachronism, like they're out of time. Much like normally I would be wearing a suit in a presentation like this, but that would make me feel a little odd in these days of Zoom where everybody's sitting in their chair at home. And so we have different expectations and we process information very differently. So let's start by taking a look at how it's affecting us as individuals.
Yeah, so there's a lot it's really important at this time to think about the psychology of the people. And there's a lot that we know because this is a big change that we're all going through as we're going through this crisis. And one of the first things that we had to confront was finding out about it for the first time, this notion of fear. And what that immediately does for the brain is it activates these circuits that end up putting us on high alert. So this brain structure called the amygdala is activated more than it typically is, and it's focusing us on information and making us sensitive to the environment to try to understand what's going on. And another aspect is that we're engaging in this fight or flight response, these sort of really quick kind of irrational decisions that we're making. And so that's another aspect of what we're doing as a society right now. But this initial fear response is just a temporary thing. This is not something that people can sustain for weeks on end. And it sort of contributes, though, and transitioned into these other emotions, which is this feeling of stress and anxiety. And it's kind of very subtle, but they're underlying everything that we're doing. It kind of shapes our behavior in the sense that things that we didn't think about before, like reaching for door handles or going out in public, how far people are from us when they walk. Now we're having to think about that. And it sort of underlies.
And I think it's worth reminding something you said to me, David, is that when you talk about stress and anxiety in this circumstance, it's different than how we often use it colloquially. You know, we'll often talk about, oh, I'm stressed at work, or I'm anxious about this kid's whatever. This is actually more of a psychological condition that is much more elevated than what we normally talk about. It's more of a perpetual condition, and we have stronger reactions to it, right?
Right. And there's a lot of sort of behavioral consequences of this kind of prolonged stress and anxiety. So in addition to becoming more reactionary, we generally become less logical and more emotional. We become more susceptible to fear-based information. In some sense, we immediately kind of search it out. And we're also seeking out social connections. That's one of the big things that we're driven towards right now.
Now, the thing that we seek most now are connections with other people. We go to our families, we go to our friends, and we're isolated from them, which is kind of exacerbating this situation. And one of the big takeaways right now is this last point, is that people are open to behavioral change. And we'll see that we're already changing fairly dramatically as consumers, but we're also willing to make other changes when prompted. And behavior change is one of the hardest things that we'll ever try to accomplish as marketers, right? You know, getting people to change is really difficult. We do it really slowly, but we're in a period that's very unique, and we're willing to radically change behavior. And that might mean adding your product to our shopping list on a regular basis. It may mean doing business with a company that we're unfamiliar with. It may mean changing how we interact with your business at all, or choosing to sign longer term agreements or shorter term agreements. But if we are intentional about this time and we view it as an opportunity, this is the opportunity, is that our prospective customers are open to major behavior change that we could help mold and shape, as long as we do it in highly ethical ways and nudging them in ways that are beneficial to them. And that's what we want to focus on today.
Yeah, that's going to be a key point that underlies everything that we talk about. And it relates to the system 1 and system 2 processing, which I'll let you talk about here, Jake.
Yeah, if you've seen our materials before, you're likely familiar with Dr. Kahneman's work. He won the Nobel Prize for this research. And what he illustrated is there's not one decision-making system in the brain, there's two. The one on the right of your screen is the logical system, and the one you're likely most familiar with. It's when we think through the pros and cons of things and come up with optimal solutions. We don't like using it even the best of times. We typically save it. But in times like this, we almost avoid it entirely. And it's because of that stress situation we're in. And we use this other system called System 1. And System 1 is an automated system. And it happens without your awareness, without your permission. And it functions on kind of I hate to use the word subconscious level because that implies a subconscious system, but just on a sub-awareness level. And we use that system almost exclusively during this period. And that's critical to understand because it has major implications. It means we're not open to complex arguments. It means we need very simple concepts and a lot of other implications that we want to cover today.
Yeah, so that impacts the way that we see advertisements and commercials. So it's really critical to understand the importance and emphasis on System 1 quick decisions right now. Now, the big sort of psychological shift that we've been thinking about and that we need to consider is a change in our values. Now, we have a core set of fundamental values which are driven by these separate processes in the brain. So these sort of dedicated psychological processes that underlie the values that we hold as a society. And these include care and harm, the spectrum of fairness to cheating, loyalty and betrayal, authority to subversion, and sanctity and degradation.
And it is worth mentioning here that, all of these we fluctuate on, but we're undergoing major shifts in all of them. But there's one of them that you've talked about, David, that's critically important to understand.
Right, yeah, we'd love to dive into all of these, but really we're thinking about this sanctity degradation value right now because it's designed to help us avoid communicable diseases. And that's the adaptive challenge that it solves for us. And it is triggered by particular signs like waste and disease people, and it's associated with the emotion of disgust. And it's also tied to our virtues. So the virtues of temperance, chastity, piety, and cleanliness are related actually to this sort of really fundamental feeling of disgust. So this is a really critical point here.
And this is worth sinking in on a little bit because not only are we processing information differently, our value system has changed. And the practical implication means that things that used to feel normal to us, now we attach very different value judgments to, and it could be as simple as somebody walks down the sidewalk close to us. And before it'd been like, yeah, whatever. Now it's like, whoa, 6 feet, guys, let's back it up a little bit. And that really means not just that we're evaluating interpersonal connections differently, but we're evaluating ads very differently. Things that seemed very normal to us just 30 days ago or 60 days ago, now we process with a value judgment very differently. So we've got to stop and take a look at what we were doing before and realize that it's being processed and evaluated in a different context with a different value system than what we used to have. Now, David had pulled some phenomenal examples here. One of my favorites is from Kentucky Fried Chicken. They had recently have a new ad campaign kind of bringing back the finger looking good concept. We're all familiar with that from years ago, and they were emphasizing it. And that makes sense in a normal time. But all of a sudden, in a coronavirus outbreak time, not only does it not make sense, it fuels this feeling of disgust and, whoa, wait a minute, that's inappropriate. And they had to pull the ad.
Don't lick your fingers. Don't even put your fingers near your face.
Yeah. This has made me very aware of how much I touch my face on a daily basis. Another example of this are, I think it's a Miller Lite ad. The thought of, hey, let's get together rather than using social media and let's all get together in a bar. Great, normal feeling. But all of a sudden, this notion of we're all getting together in a third-party space is generating value judgments against it that are very negative. And again, this is an ad that made sense 60 days ago, but all of a sudden feels very off-kilter. Now, the lesson here is we need to take all of the creative that we have been running and view it through this new prism of what people will process it as. So some things are fairly obvious. We don't have groups touching a face, things that might be viewed through disgust, and there are a lot more that are more subtle. So this is lesson number one of let's take a look at the strategic things that we are doing and reevaluate them. And there's some lessons here. Our core message, number one, needs to change from being product focused to generation of goodwill.
Yeah, during times of crisis, this is one of the strongest urges that we have. We saw it during Hurricane Katrina, during 9/11. We have this really deep desire, this longing to help others, and it makes us feel good. It's an important part of our resilience to the disaster, and so that's something that we're really striving for right now, but we don't have it. We can't find it.
And this is a good time to remember how you're feeling right now. If chances are you're like the rest of us, you're stressed, and you're stressed in a way that you haven't been. We're bombarded with negative news, and we almost get exhausted from that feeling. So we are desperately looking for good news. We're looking for good, positive stories. And rather than being responsive to normal ad messages, we are looking for companies that are doing good things. And that can mean conveying something in a very positive framework, or they're genuinely doing good deeds. And let's look at some examples of that. So one from St. Patrick's Day, when St. Patrick's Day was kind of effectively canceled, we weren't going to have parades anymore. Guinness responded very quickly with an ad with a very uplifting message.
Guinness has been around for 260 years, and we've been lucky to be a part of your St. Patrick's Day for generations. While we know this year things feel different, we've learned over time that we're pretty tough when we stick together. So what do you really need for some St. Paddy's Day cheer? A pint? Sure, we'll take one. Some corned beef? Yeah, if you're offering. Irish music? We'll sing along. A big parade? Don't worry, we'll march again. On St. Patrick's Day, we're all Irish. But let's not forget that every day we're all human. What matters is being with people you care about. Whether you're planning to safely celebrate at the pub or hosting at home, if you can call the people around you, friends or family, you've already won. When you raise a pint of Guinness, also remember to raise each other up. Be good to one another. Celebrate safely. Thank the ones protecting us. And now or later, don't forget to stop in and say hi to all our friends in the pubs and bars. As for us, we signed a 9,000-year lease on our brewery a while back, so we're not going anywhere. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Can't wait for next St. Patrick's Day. It's going to be a really big party.
Yeah, and I'm sure you noticed a few things immediately in this. Yes, they had product in it, and that's okay, but it's more of an uplifting message. The other thing you probably noticed is that 3 weeks is a really long time, and some of the imagery they used in that ad are people getting together in collective groups that now seems out of touch. And so that's a good example of, at the time it made a lot of sense, and so we had to be very sensitive to what's going on, but it's the uplifting message that we're looking for. Now, uplifting message can be one great strategy to implement here, but it can also be actually doing good deeds. Because right now people are looking for actions as opposed to words. So they want to see us doing good things in this environment. And luckily, there are a lot of great examples of this. And there's a lot of great data off of what we can expect after the fact. And I'll share the data with you after we share some of these examples. You've probably seen some of these, like U-Haul, when we started canceling colleges. They offered free temporary storage. Jimmy John's offering free lunches to students and kids who would normally get fed at school. You're getting a lot of great coverage for it. Dyson's has designed a new ventilator and overhauled the production to start producing those things. There's a French perfume company that is changing their operations to begin producing hand sanitizers. And there are dozens and dozens of other examples. Part of the lesson here is as we look at past data and similar crises, companies like this get majorly rewarded long-term because the goodwill they generate becomes a core part of their brand, and people will choose to do business with these companies almost in spite of whatever service or product they are offering because they have such goodwill generated. And so as you think about some of these things, I encourage you to think about them not just let's do good, but they're genuine marketing opportunities and marketing expenses because they will pay dividends long-term, and the evidence for that is fairly overwhelming. And that's a major lesson here, that if you're going to be communicating, focus on doing goodwill, positive, uplifting messages, and you can reap huge benefits later on as people want to reward your company for being a great corporate citizen, a good member of our society, if you will.
Yeah, people are very sensitive to this right now, and they're going to keep track of how companies behaved and what they did. So it's very impactful, these actions that they're taking. Now, the second point here is authenticity. And this, again, is a key psychological thing that we seek during these difficult times, because we know there's a crisis out there. So we need to have accurate information that we know comes from trustworthy sources. And often that means simplistic videos without all the fancy things, with the heads just talking to you like a normal person.
And part of this in authenticity is really about not seeming like a normal ad. And that can be important. There's some great examples of this. A couple of weeks ago, American Airlines president spoke directly to the camera. It was a long form video, but it got a huge amount of views and great response. The LA Dodgers manager came out when they initially postponed Major League Baseball to talk about the reasons it was important. And again, got a lot of great coverage. And it felt authentic, and they were able to talk about the impacts of their business and the impacts of them personally, and this real connection point with our consumers. Because right now, everybody's off kilter. I mean, I'm stressed, and it's the conversations where you realize other people are going through things too, that you feel a point of connection. So having some authenticity within your outbound communications, within your social media posts, within your press releases, within how you talk to our consumers needs to be a core part of our strategy.
Yeah, this is a real opportunity to connect with your customers right now and let them see the face of these companies that maybe they haven't seen before. And it doesn't mean that you don't have to sell products. You can still continue to do that. You just have to acknowledge the situation and that you're sensitive to it. So Crate and Barrel here, they acknowledge we're in this together. They're helping to feed America. They're giving 20% off Wine and Dine. This Oatly brand, in their copy, they say, you're thinking, really, here's another product related message. But it's like, look, we just want to let you know that here we are. If you need some oat milk, then we have the ability to give that to you. And that can be of value to a lot of people right now.
So we need to acknowledge what's going on as part of the lesson here and be authentic about how it's affecting us and how we should engage with consumers.
Right. Now, the next important thing, strategy that we need to be considering right now is simple stories. And so this is the reason why is because we're really anxious right now. We're bombarded with information. So it's really critical that your message comes across basically in the instant that people see that message. Because we're so aligned with that automatic system one process. That's the sort of underlying psychology behind this. And that initially came up because of all the public health things that we had to start doing. Like, how do we get ourselves not to touch our face as much? How do we get ourselves to wash our hands appropriately? And this was a really creative example from Gloria Gaynor. She went on TikTok and started this TikTok challenge. Makes me want to wash my hands right now. Yeah, that got really popular and it took off with TikTok challenge. Everybody else was doing it. And so it was in our public consciousness. Social distancing is another concept. You know, it's an example of framing where you can take a term like social isolation, which has a negative frame, but you turn it into social distancing and it becomes a little more positive. And that allows it to catch on. It makes it more likely that people will want to follow that.
And keeping things simple visually is a good example of how to make this happen. It's a clip from the New York Times, and they're trying to get across the concept, and just the visual became very powerful in how disruptive it was. And it's simple in its concept. And that's a major lesson here. Like, we will not think through things. My kids aren't getting a lot of my dad jokes anymore because we're looking for things to be very straightforward.
Oh man, Jake, that's really sad.
I need new material.
You have to find some outlet for your dad jokes.
Well, it'll come back.
So the one consideration with social distancing is that the more specific the message can be, the more effective it will be. So even though you're saying social distancing, it's like, what does that mean exactly? So a more specific message like stay at home says, okay, now I know what that means. It means stay at home. And Luke O'Reilly created this creative copy for using Guinness, where he put the couch and made it form a pint. And you can see that the message comes across right away. And it's very instant and creative.
And the copy at the bottom, stay at home, straight and to the point. Don't try to be nuanced. Don't try to be esoteric because we'll miss opportunities. And there have been some examples of where this went awry, and we want to share some of those as well. Our friends at Netflix had a great insight that if you're out in public, then you are spoiling it for the rest of us. And therefore, we're going to spoil shows for you. So they have put spoilers in a lot of their ad placements to really get across the point that you need to stay at home.
Yeah, IKEA did this creative thing where they made instructions, which is like, you need one key, one lock, and 100 pieces of toilet paper, and then you're good.
You must be short on toilet paper if you think that's 100 pieces, man. It's 100 rolls.
100 rolls of toilet paper. Yeah, that would be bad.
Another good example, you're likely immediately spotted this as the famous Surat painting with people lounging by the lake and having a great day. But the removal of those people sent a very simple, powerful message about what's expected out of all of us. Like, don't go out, don't be in places. And that was able to effectively communicate something fairly powerful. Now, there are some examples of where this hasn't been done particularly well. This was a educational display out of Great Britain, where they wanted to let you know you need to stay 6 feet apart or 2 meters for our metric friends. But on the sign, visually, those people aren't 6 feet apart. They're only about a foot apart, even though the sign is over 6 feet long. A much stronger representation would have been to put the people on either side of the sign. Because again, we're not processing. People don't read and process copy like they normally do. And so we need things to hit people over their head. And that leads us to another good point related to this concept called what you see is all there is. And what this means fundamentally is the imagery that is directly in front of you, you will use just that information to make your next decision, whatever that decision is going to be. So what you see is all there is. You're not going to pull things from long-term memory. You're not going to remember a reference that you used to have. And thus we need to kind of put all information in front of people. Now, McDonald's recently did this broken arches or separated arches campaign and launched it. And they're trying to illustrate the need for social isolation. And that probably makes sense to everybody now. It's been out long enough. We've seen some other companies mimic this in their logos. What you may not remember is when it first came out, there was a ton of confusion of like, wait, what does this mean? Have the arches always been separated? I'm kind of confused. And what's going on is not that people are stupid, but rather that we're using system one processing. We use this, what you see is all there is. And it needed something to go along with it to remind people of what it means, not making me pull an inference, because people aren't going to do inference right now because our brain is processing very differently. And so this is a good example of it was close. And as subsequent versions of this have come out with other companies, they're putting on screen, stay apart, stay socially isolated, or simply stay home, and just being blunt in their message, because what you see is all there is. So we have to hit people over the heads with our core message if we want it to be processed.
Yep. And the fifth strategy recommendation right now is to consider new goals. And so if your goals before were increasing store visits, increasing sales and applications, average ticket, your goals now should be awareness, generating affinity, press, behavior change, and thinking about ways that you can kind of build a community and connect with some people.
Yeah, and part of the reason that these are new goals is because the research has shown this is what's important in times like this, and these are much more highly related to long-term success. Now, we've added one that may be very unfamiliar to you, this concept of behavior change, and it's because people are very open to changing their behaviors right now, and luckily there's a model for how we do that. And it starts with creating changes in lifestyle. Now, you don't have to do the changes in lifestyle, because I'm sure you're aware we all radically changed our lifestyle. As you can see me broadcasting from my bedroom right now. Because of the radical changes in lifestyle, we're willing to radically change our personal behavior. A lot of that behavior change we're already familiar with, but it leads us open to changing our behavior and our relationships with your brand, your service, and your product. And there may never be another time in our history where people are going to be more open to changing their behavior than they are right now. So let's talk a little bit about how we go about that, as well as some of the behavior changes that we're currently undergoing.
Yeah, so let's just examine some initial quick behavior changes that happen. One of the things you could do is look at China as they've gone through this first phase of this. And the changes that we see are expected: increase in in-home food, increase in household care, increase in healthcare, less eating out, less holidays.
Now, all of these probably seem obvious to us now, but these were predicted several months ago about what we were going to undergo. But there are other behavior changes that may not seem as obvious, and those are the ones that we want to focus on now. First being a huge boost in how we consume media. Now, we knew with more time on our hands, people are going to consume more media. That's just what we have always done historically. But the growth in social media has been spectacular. Our consumption of video has gone up to crazy levels. Within 1 week, the first week of kind of the semi-quarantine that a lot of places were in, before we had full lockdown, we saw almost a 50% increase in video news consumption. Now, these numbers have continued to go up, and we expect them to continue to rise the longer that we are isolated and quarantined. And this has major implications, because if you are out there, you have a lot more eyeballs, and there's an opportunity to communicate with our audience. But something else is going on at the same time. We are having advertisers get out of the market en masse. Now, a lot of these make sense. Travel and tourism, there's nothing to go do. And as we surveyed CMOs and ad agencies, we're seeing a major cut in Q2. Now, the effect that this has is that the rates for media are plummeting. You can get a lot more value than what you could have just a few months ago. So if you can be in market, it is one of the most cost-effective times to be in market. And we'll see later in the presentation that the data shows us that if you're willing to be in market right now, you will dramatically outperform those who are not in market. Now, this is all assuming that we can adjust our message appropriately. So some immediate recommendations. Let's take another look at our media strategy. So if you laid in media plans coming into the year, maybe in first quarter, now's the time to take a look at them. Let's revisit those buys and see if we can just simply get more for them, because the media companies themselves will rarely call you and be like, hey, you're now paying way above market, we're going to give you more. But a simple phone call can make that happen. Some other changes we'd suggest people take a look at is taking a new look at outdoor boards. You know, I'm sure you're aware, we're not driving very much. And a lot of the outdoor boards seem kind of anachronistic. And so they're simply going to be overpriced for the eyeballs they're going to get over the next couple of months. Streaming has exploded. This needs to be a core part of some of our media. Online and social, obviously, you saw those numbers, and audio and video. And I'm including radio in this because it's often a surprising nugget. People expect that, well, we're not in cars as much, so we're not listening to as much radio. And that's not true. We've changed where we're listening to radio and how we listen to radio. So the content needs to change, but we're actually listening to quite a bit more audio than we were just a few weeks ago, which is a surprise to a lot of folks. So a lot better performance at a lot lower cost, which is a good time to take a look at our current media strategies.
Yeah, and it's really important to take a look at e-commerce right now. That's one of the big trends going on that's likely to sustain as people form these new habits surrounding e-commerce. So we saw a 52% increase in online sales for online shoppers since the outbreak began. And this is early on data. So these numbers keep changing. In China, this online retailer saw 215% growth in online grocery sales. And that means that we need to really consider our digital infrastructures right now.
And this probably isn't a surprise to anybody. Like, we've all immediately gone, oh my goodness, there's a bunch I wish we would have done coming into this. But I want to show you the outcome for folks that have done a great job of this. You've probably seen the headlines where Domino's hiring an extra 10,000 delivery drivers nationally. Their sales are up 70% in the first week of the pandemic. Amazon is looking to hire an additional 100,000 employees. Now, neither of these surprise most people, but what may be a surprise is some of their competitors are not doing nearly as well. The answer lies in their digital infrastructure. They had spent a lot of time reducing what we call cognitive friction, or just put it in simple terms, making their digital experience easy. So Domino's has a one-click ordering system. Amazon has a famous one-click ordering system and suggesting what you need to have. In a prior webinar, we talked about the concept of reducing digital friction. Progressive and Geico have done great examples of this, where they do a lot of work for you so that you don't have to do as much work to do business with them. For instance, if I put in my name and address, they immediately go, oh, here's your wife, here's your home information on your the cards that you have registered, and on your home. You don't have to go find all that information because we're pulling it from publicly available data. They're reducing the cognitive load that is required to do business with them. They're, in essence, making it easy. Now, we could spend the rest of the day talking about best practices in the digital space. It probably deserves its own webinar. For the time being, I would encourage you to go visit one of our partners, alloy.digital. This is their core focus. They have a lot of content about how to best develop apps within this time period to reduce cognitive load, to reduce cognitive friction. That is their website, alloy.digital. They've got some great stuff and be happy to talk to you. But for now, I want to move on and get to some other principles. And let's talk about where things are going.
Yeah, so we want to keep track. What are these new habits that people are going to form? What are these long-term behavior patterns that they're going to create as this emerges? And how can we contribute to that? And one of the important observations right now is there's going to be an attention shift that we're going to see. So right now, half of the articles consumed on Facebook were related to the coronavirus. And the majority of the news that we're consuming right now and looking at is related to COVID-19. But that's not always going to be the case. And that's what they showed in a study about the swine flu crisis, is that once you have a new risk that becomes familiar to the public, then the public gradually shifts their attention to other things. We sort of begin to lead normal lives again and start to think about other things. And only new changes, new pieces of news that are strikingly different get our attention again. But again, considering what are our values, how are our values going to shape where our attention goes after this?
And we're already beginning to reach that point. So we feel like the news consumption for the COVID-19 is beginning to dip. Like people have reached a point of saturation. They're ready to talk about something else. We're entering into kind of the second phase of attention shift where people are looking for more fun content and lighthearted content. And within the next, say, week or so, we're going to see people shift to more normal research behaviors. So searches for things like life insurance, we expect to continue to stop their drop and head in the other direction. We're going to share some of that data in a minute because, again, we have data from more mature versions of this market, and some of the results are surprising about how people shift back into shopping behavior.
Yeah, John Krasinski from The Office, he had a good news YouTube thing that he popped up with, and people love it. And Jack Black came out with TikTok recently where he was dancing around in cowboy boots without a shirt on. And we're definitely gravitating towards that right now, which is great to see. So thinking about the change in values, one of the impacts that it's had is the traditional notion of the influencer is entirely different now. The notion of seeing somebody who's traveling and who's leading a lavish lifestyle, driving their fancy car, that's not what we want to see right now. And so the actual pattern of what an influencer looks like is completely different. We're going to be interested in people who are cooking and teaching us how to work out from home and teaching us about finance and things like that. And so it's going to look completely different.
This is a good example of that value change that you talked about a little while ago, David. And these value changes are going to have longer term effects. If you're old enough, you might remember after 9/11, some of our value change occurred then as well. We elevated police officers and first responders and the fire department, and they became, in a way, influencers that we could refer to. We're going to see a similar shift here. They will be different. Healthcare workers are, of course, going to be some of the new heroes that we want to help and put on a pedestal, and we'll value their opinions. But there are going to be some other areas as well. So just know that who we value, both as the people we put in our ads and the folks that you want to pay to help influence your consumers, that value is just going to have a long-term effect. And so we need to be reevaluating some of those outreaches that you may currently have in place or even have in the works. It won't be life as normal.
Right. And the second point to consider is that what we've seen right now is that FOMO goes online. The fear of missing out used to be something that we could experience because we would see on social media our friends were out doing cool things, traveling. We'd see events pop up on Facebook. That doesn't exist anymore, but we're still sort of psychologically prepared for it. We kind of expect it. There's sort of a gap, and that actually moved online. And so we saw Instagram Live and Facebook Live views doubled in Italy during the first week of their imposed quarantine. And this is basically ephemeral content. This is content that comes up and it goes away, and that's why you're missing out if you don't see it. And so companies can take advantage of it. This is BrewDog. They created an online bar where their customers can go in and all drink a beer together, have a little happy hour. Instagram stories, of course, is ephemeral content. And in general, the notion of a story, it lasts for 24 hours. And this is something that brands like Twitter and YouTube have already been thinking about and trying to implement because it's already been on the rise. But now with our lack of FOMO in real life, we're really striving for it. And, we're seeing an increase in webinars, of course, as well, too. And a consequence of that, we've talked about tribal marketing before.
Right.
It's even more important right now because it's one of the things that we can focus on. People are primed and ready to go on and online have online Zoom chats with communities and build communities around that.
It's like you said a little while ago, David, like we're in times of stress, we seek social connection. Ironically, we can't have it for the good of ourselves and the nation. And so we're looking to replicate it in other places. And we're seeing some brands step in to begin fill this void in places like this. And B2B is a place where it makes a lot of sense to bring your customers together, to have group community meetings. And even if we're really not selling during those time periods, the very act of bringing people together has great long-term perceptual value.
Yeah, Facebook is really promoting Facebook groups because people don't like, this is an insight we talked about last webinar, people don't like being super public, but when they have more of a community, then the really rich conversations happen. And that's why Facebook groups is potentially really popular right now. Netflix created Netflix Party where people can watch movies together and chat with each other. And actually Instagram jumped on board just recently with the same thing where we can watch things together with our friends on Instagram.
And these can be very cheap and effective ways of building a community. So a hypothetical example we put together is, what if Wonder Bread decided to host a viewing party, say on Netflix, of The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights, and they might even pull Will Ferrell in to answer questions. It could be a very cost-efficient way of building a community, letting people relate to what they're doing, and generating goodwill because they're providing that platform of a real-time event that is community building. And so you ought to be creative in ways that you think about this, but it's not just for the B2B space. It can be B2C as well, and there's a lot of opportunity here. And it's just something new that we've never thought about before, because this wasn't a major concern 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. And so this is something new that we need to be giving consideration to how we talk and relate to our consumers.
Yeah, Wonder Bread, if you're listening, we're giving you gold right now, just for free. Now, the next transition is telehealth and virtual care. That's coming into our public consciousness. We're all hearing about it right now. We're all potentially going to learn how to use it and make it basically a new norm. Like you got Andrew Cuomo, who's tweeting about it to everybody.
And it's a good example of behavior change that we can change rapidly. One of our clients, American Family Care, the largest chain of urgent care clinics in the country, wanted and needed to change their consumers' behavior very quickly. So did an ad very quickly to encourage people to use this as a point of entry into the system.
Stuck at home? Sick? Welcome to AFC Telecare, where our qualified healthcare providers can meet your healthcare needs now without your leaving home. For all your healthcare needs, go to afcurgentcare.com/telecare.
And so it's a great example of being able to change consumer behavior in a very short period of time. Now, this move to online will accelerate. Again, we have very mature markets to take a look at and see what happens. As we get through this phase of being exhausted with coronavirus news, we'll go through a phase of looking for lighthearted, funny news, and then we will start looking for legitimate business-oriented searches, if you will. So one of the outcomes we saw is that within China, insurance searches went up dramatically towards the end of the curve. Now, part of this is because people have time on their hands. It's a natural phenomenon, but it's also partly because the cognitive dissonance associated with searching for insurance, I don't like thinking about my own mortality, has been blown away. People are forced to think about that. And so we expect within the next few weeks, searches for things like insurance to go up. And it won't just be insurance. It's going to be a lot of major ticket items that will be driven, the behavior change will be driven by consumers. One of those areas we expect to be the auto space. The OEMs have done a lot of work in trying to get us to shop online and then go to a dealership. We expect people want to complete that process. Now, they'll still work with a dealership, but we're already seeing dealers offer delivery to your home, and we'll bring the car to your home for a test drive. And so that behavior change is not only happening, but it's going to accelerate and become permanent as companies are rapid to adopt to changing behaviors.
Right. Another change that we're seeing is an increase in bucket list items. So one stat shows a 35% increase in book sales with a notable increase among challenging classics. So these books that people have always wanted to read, like Ulysses, they're going out and they're looking for those books right now. And this is related to the notion of, in times of stress, it's helpful to consider how you can treat yourself.
3 words for you. Treat yourself. Treat yourself 2011.
Clothes.
Treat yourself.
Fragrances.
Treat yourself.
Massages.
Treat yourself.
Mimosas.
Treat yourself.
Fine leather goods.
Treat yourself.
It's the best day of the year.
The best day of the year.
And this is one that is fairly counterintuitive for most people because we have a period of anxiety and economic uncertainty. And usually that pairing, you would think rationally, we would start hunkering down, we would curtail our spending, only spend on things that are necessary. But we find that the opposite is true. People are finding ways to relieve their anxiety through what we'll call indulgences. And the indulgences may be simple. It could be extra chocolate, or it could be focused on premium products that they normally wouldn't engage with. And we see this coming out of other recessions as well. For instance, coming out of the 2008 financial collapse, some of the major winners, if you will, were the big luxury brands like skincare and sparkling wines and very high-end products. Now, part of that has to do with the economic skew of who is affected, but it is a notion that applies across every economic spectrum. Including simple things like grooming routines. And I imagine if you go look in your own kitchen, you will find things that are not normally there. For instance, we've bought a lot of dark chocolate because that's kind of my indulgence. What about you, David?
How much dark chocolate did you buy, Jake? Did you really stock up? Are you hoarding all the supply over there?
Well, I couldn't get any toilet paper, so it was a thing I got extra of. I hope I didn't short you there.
Relieved your anxiety. You're like, they're not getting my dad jokes. I gotta eat a bunch of dark chocolate.
That's right.
Yeah, FOMO for real. That's going to happen as we adjust to the ability that we can go out again. We have a time right now where we can think about potential places that we've always wanted to go to and psychologically connect to these places digitally. And that's what we saw with SARS, 22.5% increase in traveling among those airlines after SARS went away.
And you can think about this as anywhere but here. And it doesn't mean that you have, or people will necessarily get on flights and go around the world, but they're going to want to get out. So if you're in the travel tourism space, this fear of missing out or FOMO is a real phenomenon. And people are already beginning to have conversations of where they want to go. So I know if you're in the travel tourism industry, these are very dark days, but know that these conversations are happening and people will do the planning prior to actually being able to pull the trigger. Thus, if you can, stay in market at least a little bit so that you can influence those decisions, because the people who are willing to stay in market will benefit from it. And there are a lot of other trends that we couldn't get to today. We expect to see a boom in home overhauls, but there's a lesson here about being flexible. Some data that you are likely familiar with from other circumstances, anytime there is a crisis, we see that people react very differently. Some brands continue to spend, some brands have a little bit of pullback, and some brands go dark. The brands that go dark take on average 5 years to catch up to brands that merely pull back or maintain their spend. So I know it's tough, and the thought of going to your CEO and going, no, we got to stay in market, even though people can't buy from us today, is a tough sell. But the data is overwhelming. You will reap the benefits of it long term. And the answer is true even as we come out. The data continues to be overwhelming. The brands who continue to spend or accelerate their spend as we come out into a post breakdown area, they will grow 9 times faster than brands that do not. And this data has applied to every single similar circumstance that we've looked at. If you can maintain spend, do so. If you are having sales right now, now's the time to get out and shape human behavior, because we will have long-term benefits. Now, the content of those ads as we enter into a recovery period ought to change. We've got to focus less on our specific products and more on our brand. And I'm going to mean brand slightly differently than perhaps we've talked about it before. You're going to want to do things like convey your size, strength, and stability, because people will want to do business with larger, stable companies, and being seen automatically conveys that. We need to focus less on selling individual products and more on developing affinity and goodwill, that doing good and having positive messages that we talked about. And so it's a very different shift than what we have talked about before. And we need to also have new long-term marketing goals as we come out of this crisis and enter into a new normal. We need to focus on things like share of voice. How are we comparing to our competitors? And it's a big opportunity for a lot of segments as people have bailed out. I would also encourage you to look at perceived share of voice. This isn't just how much we're spending, but also how much buzz are we getting in the online space and social media and in press, because both those have just as much weight during this period, and in some cases an outsized effect. So having a strong social media and PR effort during this period is absolutely critical. We want to focus on perceived product quality or in service quality within what it is that we sell, because those are going to be the brands that do particularly well. The limited resources people have in a financial retrenchment period, they will want to spend on quality products, and perceived strength and stability of our entities and the things that we sell. So we can have product in there, but we want to focus on slightly different attributes than we might normally have.
Yeah, and you just packed in so many things, and there's so much stuff that we didn't have a chance to talk about. But, fortunately, we can think about the psychology, and we can be sensitive to what the customer is interested in and their values. And as this passes, we'll be able to march on. And
we are really just scratching the surface of a lot of this data. Like I said, David has organized a whole lot of it. So if you want to see additional things about any of these topics we've covered today, we will be posting this video to our website. We will continue to post other videos and other contents and other blog contents about related topics. We'll go deeper on some of these. Or if you just have questions or want to talk, submit a question in the chat function, send me an email, or if you want to schedule some more time for us to dive in on your vertical or your specific business, send Ashley an email and we'll schedule some time. We're happy to help anybody right now because we all need to be helping each other. So with the few minutes we have left, I thought we'd take a few questions that have popped up. We will be responding to everybody that submitted a question, even if I have to do it after the fact. So don't be afraid of chiming in even as we're running out of time. Ashley, what good questions have you seen come across?
We have a lot. Let's see. So one of the first ones is, what advice for companies that don't have multi-million-dollar budgets and are not regularly producing new creative? Should they temp? Halt marketing activity? Any recommendations there?
So great question. If you can continue marketing, do so, because there will be pent-up demand for almost regardless of what you do. So you want to change your goal from sales to goodwill. You may need to change your creative. You can still do creative, but it's going to be using stock footage, animation, and short form video. So like just recording somebody talking directly to the camera is perfectly acceptable. People understand that and are actually resonating to it better than they would a highly polished ads in some circumstances. If you can do that, please do so. I know that won't be the case for everybody. Sometimes we're just going to have to pull back and hold, but as soon as you can, and as soon as we enter a recovery period, you better be ready to get back on air with a core message that talks to our consumers, because those are going to be the companies that succeed, particularly over the next 5 years, because the consequences of what we do over the next, say, 180 days are going to resonate for years. And that is a scary thought for a lot of folks. I know it's not easy because these are political decisions, and sometimes the decision to cut ad budgets is the first thing that goes. But just know that there's data that supports your position to continue talking to consumers, even if you can't sell things right now.
Next question, are there any early emerging new tribes to be on the lookout for?
Early and emerging new tribes. So yes, we're seeing tribes form around individual companies fairly rapidly, particularly as people are doing online communities. We're going to be hosting a CMO and C-suite happy hour next week. And it's just an opportunity for people to get together with like-minded people and, talk about what's going on. So anybody can pull that together. Just know that there's a pressing need and people are going to be responsive to it. Because sometimes we just want to get together and talk shop. And sometimes we just want to get together and gripe about the kids being in the house or how difficult it is to maintain that balance or when's the market going to come back. But it's that human connection that we're all striving for that's the important point to focus on. And each of you might find new ways to manifest it.
Next question is, what are the signals that we should evolve from COVID-19 specific messaging to the core message?
So good question. Being authentic is the thing that everybody can bake into their outbound message. Acknowledge what's going on. Talk about how it's affecting you, and more specifically, how you can affect the consumers during this period. If there's something you can do to help, do so, and make sure you're focusing on how you are helping. So we're encouraging a lot of our clients to do offers and put some of their marketing funds into doing good, and to certainly change their message. Change your Facebook post if you can't do anything else. Change your press release to talk about some of these things that you can do. Because even when your ad budgets are cut, you still have ad vehicles, and you need to adjust your messaging to adapt during these times. And give it some thought. If you need help thinking through your specific business or industry, give me a yell. I'm happy to help. But everybody's got something where they can adapt and be successful in this environment, at least in raising affinity, which will help you as we enter a recovery period to recover faster and stronger than our competitors that don't do anything.
All right, so next question is, should new long-term goals be introduced to clients already today?
Introduced to clients. So yes, is the short version. We need to begin talking about those. Some of the long-term goals we won't shift over to perhaps for another 30 or 60 days. We should be shifting to more near-term goals and what we expect out of our marketing, because a lot of our products and services people just aren't going to buy right now. No one's shopping for some of the things that we're selling, but that doesn't mean your message isn't having an effect. It is. And that's the major takeaway here. The marketing still has an effect, but it won't show up for several more months, perhaps. And if you can convince the rest of your C-suite of that, you can really grow and benefit out of these times, as you're willing to be one of the only people within your space marketing. And so you need to both shift to near-term goals, as well as let's begin talking about what are some of our long-term goals need to be. And if you're doing that, you can view this as an opportunity. And if you view it as an opportunity, you'll do particularly well. If you view this as a threat and you retrench, we know what the outcome is going to be. It's going to be a rough next several years.
Next question, have you seen any wealth management companies that are doing a great job instilling consumer confidence and peace of mind to prospective clients right now?
Yes. The companies that have cranked up their level of communication have done particularly well, been forthright and authentic. There have been a few local ones that we've seen do a really good job. They're putting out regular content, videos. They're having regular webinars where they're talking to their consumers and keeping them informed and just being honest about what's going on. Within all that, baking in a positive message. Now, within financial management, it's difficult because you don't want to be too rosy about what to expect in the upcoming actual economy. But you can assure people that we will come out of this and have a positive affect about what's going on long term, and finding ways to view opportunity in this. So having an underlying positive message while still being honest about what's going on is that correct balance. And so there are financial management companies doing it well. They're just changing their tactics and changing some of the day-to-day things they're doing. They're not relying on the old school commercials full of actors to do some of that communication.
Great. And I guess last question, it looks like we're winding down here. What have you seen insurance companies doing during this time period, particularly in the life and auto insurance industry?
Great question. One of the trends that we expect to happen in the coming weeks is searches for life and auto are going to accelerate as that becomes pertinent again. Life particularly, as we've broken through some of this cognitive dissonance. You need to slightly change your message if it is off kilter, like if you got rooms full of people in your ads. Those might not be as pertinent. But if you're already focused on some of the core messages about taking care of your family, you may be able to go with what you currently have. Laying in goodwill is that overall message that we have for everybody. Show that you are doing good, taking care of your customers, that you're there for them when they're ready to search, and know that they're going to bombard your website. So be prepared with digital infrastructure. If you haven't been focused on that, get as much done as quickly as you can to take advantage of this when it occurs, and then make sure you're evaluating your media during this time to resonate most effectively, to get the most out of it. If you do those things, that are going to be some auto and life insurers that do particularly well coming out of this. And if you're on this call, I hope you are one of those. Guys, this has been great. Thank you for your time. I think we're going to wrap up. My email is here. I know a lot of the questions we couldn't get to. I will reach out to those of you that submitted. And if you have other questions, give me a yell. We'll schedule some time and do what we can to help you as well. And stay safe. And I appreciate your time today.